They were Atlanta's most volatile couple, passionate, wild, and unpredictable. Jayvonte Hill and Kashira Breedlove had a love that burned bright, but like any fire fueled by rage and jealousy, it was destined to consume everything in its path. To the outside world, they were a perfect match, two people caught in a whirlwind romance that no one could quite understand. But behind closed doors, their relationship was a storm, fueled by deep insecurities, possessiveness, and a love that was anything but pure. March 16, 2024, was supposed to be just another night at Club Luxx, a night full of music, drinks, and dancing. Jayvonte was scheduled to DJ, and Kashira, as usual, was right by his side, although this time something was different. That night, something snapped. What began as a night of celebration would soon descend into a bloodbath. How does love turn into obsession? How does passion morph into deadly rage? That's the question we're left to answer, as the events of that night unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. Tonight, we unravel a story of jealousy, betrayal, and an ending that no one saw coming. Before we dive into this chilling case, like and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. This is the tragic tale of Jayvonte Hill and Kashira Breedlove, two souls who were lost in the dark corners of a love that was never meant to last. Jayvonte Hill was 27 years old and already making waves in Atlanta's nightlife scene. As a local DJ, he had a magnetic presence behind the turntables that captivated crowds night after night. His charisma and charm were undeniable, and he was the kind of guy women couldn't resist. He had the perfect mix of swagger, talent, and good looks. His reputation in the city was one of rising stardom. But while Jayvonte reveled in the attention, there was one woman who had his heart, and her name was Kashira Breedlove. Kashira, 25, was a bartender at one of Atlanta's popular night spots, and she lived for the drama. With a fiery temper and a jealousy that could scorch anyone in its path, she often found herself at the center of conflict, whether it was with other women eyeing Jayvonte or with her friends, who were often caught in the crossfire of her emotional outbursts. But beneath the surface of her short temper and tough exterior, Kashira was a woman deeply in love with Jayvonte. She wanted him, completely. And no one else was allowed to even look his way. The two of them, when they weren't fighting, shared an intense, all-consuming love that left everyone around them either captivated or repulsed. For Jayvonte, it was the chaos he couldn't seem to walk away from. For Kashira, it was the love she believed was worth the firestorms. Their relationship was a constant roller coaster, rising and crashing with every argument and every passionate make-up. Friends who witnessed the drama couldn't look away, but many worried about how destructive it was. It wasn't uncommon for their social media pages to be filled with love-filled posts one minute and intense, cryptic messages the next. Onlookers would scroll through their feeds, wondering what was real and what was just another side of a relationship that was starting to unravel at the seams. Despite the frequent drama, their followers were hooked, feeding into the narrative of a love that seemed to thrive on conflict. Jayvonte would post about his undying loyalty to Kashira, while she, in turn, posted about her devotion to him, often followed by fiery rants when things went wrong. Friends saw them as toxic, two people caught in a destructive pattern of passion and jealousy that was, at best, unhealthy. Yet, as much as their friends warned them about the volatility, they remained unable to look away. There was something magnetic about their love, something that both attracted and repelled. Jayvonte's loyal following of fans would rally behind him, calling him the city's heartthrob, while Kashira's wild posts stirred up a following of her own, people who admired her fiery spirit, even if it meant stirring up trouble. Their social media accounts became a window into a love filled with extremes, and it wasn't uncommon for their followers to witness public blow-ups, followed by tearful reconciliations. It was clear to everyone around them that their love was anything but stable. Their fights were loud, explosive, and often violent. But when the tension died down, the passion would resurface, like a love on fire that couldn't quite burn out. The good times, when they shared laughter and intimacy, were always marred by the inevitable fight that would follow. And yet, despite the chaos, they seemed inseparable, caught in a cycle of emotional highs and lows that kept them hooked to one another. Everyone around them knew their relationship was a ticking time bomb, but no one could predict when or how it would explode. This whirlwind relationship was far from conventional, but to Jayvonte and Kashira, it was theirs. They thrived on the drama, found comfort in the chaos, and convinced themselves that love, no matter how intense or destructive, was worth the ride. But on March 16, 2024, their toxic love story would reach its tragic, inevitable conclusion. It would be a night that no one who witnessed it would ever forget, and a night that would change both of their lives forever. The night at Club Luxx had all the makings of a typical evening. Jayvonte Hill, the local DJ who had been making waves across Atlanta's nightlife, was behind the booth, surrounded by the flashing lights and thumping beats of the club. The crowd was buzzing, their energy high as Jayvonte spun his tracks, each song more popular than the last. The room was packed, but for all the excitement, there was one person who couldn't find any joy in the atmosphere: Kashira Breedlove. Kashira, already tipsy when they arrived, had begun to drink heavily, her emotions amplified by the alcohol coursing through her veins. She was no stranger to feeling possessive, but tonight something felt different. Something about the energy in the room made her feel uneasy, especially when she spotted a woman, slender, confident, and dressed in a way that screamed attention, standing near the DJ booth, seemingly close to Jayvonte. Her mind instantly started to spiral. She watched the woman laugh, her smile bright and flirtatious, her body language suggestive in the way she leaned slightly toward Jayvonte as he played his set. Kashira's jealousy flared. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. Every gesture, every moment felt like a direct challenge to her. In her inebriated state, she started to see things that weren't there. The woman wasn't just standing near Jayvonte, she was getting too close, invading her territory. To Kashira, it wasn't innocent. It was a threat. Fueled by a mixture of anger, alcohol, and insecurity, Kashira decided to confront the woman. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the way people looked at her as she maneuvered toward the booth. The music seemed to drown out everything except for her own racing heartbeat. She reached the edge of the DJ booth, barely able to contain the growing fury within her. She grabbed Jayvonte's arm roughly, pulling him toward her with an urgency that caught him off guard. "Who is she?" Kashira demanded, her voice tight with anger. The words came out more as an accusation than a question, her eyes locked on the woman she had been watching. Jayvonte, still in the midst of his set, was taken aback, trying to keep his composure in the face of her outburst. "Kashira, chill," he said, trying to calm her down, but his words only seemed to fuel her fire. "I'm just working." But Kashira wasn't hearing it. Her mind was already made up. In her eyes, every smile, every glance exchanged between Jayvonte and the woman was a betrayal. Her temper flared, and before Jayvonte could react, she reached for a bottle sitting on the booth and, in a fit of rage, threw it toward the woman. The bottle crashed to the ground, shattering in a loud, chaotic explosion of glass, drawing the attention of everyone around them. The sudden noise cut through the club's booming music like a knife, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Eyes turned toward them, the once festive energy of the club now tainted with a growing sense of discomfort. Security was already on their way, but the damage had been done. Jayvonte's face reddened with embarrassment as he quickly grabbed Kashira by the arm, trying to pull her away from the scene. He wasn't just angry now, he was humiliated. The night he had worked so hard for had just been thrown into chaos by her reckless actions. "Let's go outside, Kashira," he said, his voice low and strained, a mixture of frustration and anger. "This is too much." Kashira resisted, not caring about the eyes on them or the growing tension. "You're acting like I'm crazy. She was all over you," she shouted, her voice full of bitter accusation. Jayvonte, his patience nearing its end, yanked her toward the door, dragging her through the crowd. Every step was heavy, every word she muttered only adding fuel to the fire. He was done with this outburst, but Kashira wasn't ready to stop. Her drunken rage carried her forward, her words more vicious as they crossed the threshold into the cold night air outside. "Don't touch me. She screamed, trying to break free from his grip, but he held on tightly, guiding her away from the chaos inside the club. The harsh city lights illuminated her face, showing the distorted mix of anger and hurt as she turned her fury on him. "You're just like every other guy. Always looking at other women. You think I'm stupid?" Jayvonte's frustration boiled over. He was embarrassed, frustrated, and now, he felt trapped. "I'm not the problem here, Kashira. You're the one starting all this." He shot back, his voice thick with irritation. All he wanted was to get away from the scene, but Kashira was relentless, her temper spiraling out of control with every word. Outside, the cold night air didn't offer any relief. Kashira continued to shout, her words jagged and loud, spilling out with every ounce of venom she could muster. Jayvonte, shaking with frustration, pulled her even further down the street, away from the lights and the crowd. The weight of her jealousy was too much to bear. Jayvonte knew this wasn't just another argument. This time, something had snapped. As they stood there on the street, Kashira's words still ringing in his ears, he realized that no matter how hard he tried to calm her down, this relationship was on the brink of something much darker. And for all the love they once shared, it was now a toxic, volatile force neither of them could control. The air outside was cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the argument that had been escalating inside the club. Jayvonte's heart pounded, not just from the adrenaline but from the sickening realization that what had started as a passionate love affair had spiraled out of control. He could feel the eyes of bystanders following them, their whispers blending with the sounds of the city, but all he could focus on was getting away from Kashira. She was right behind him, stumbling slightly, still fueled by the alcohol and rage. He reached the car, but she wasn't backing off. She wasn't done. The hurt in her eyes twisted into something darker, something uncontrollable. "You're cheating on me, aren't you?" Kashira's voice was sharp, laced with venom. Jayvonte had heard these accusations before, but tonight, they felt different. Her jealousy was no longer a passing comment, it was a jagged knife lodged deep in their relationship, driving her to the edge. He stopped, his back to her as he reached for the door handle. He wasn't sure if he could take much more of this. "Kashira, please," he said, his voice low and strained. "I didn't do anything. Just stop." But it didn't stop. It never stopped with her. She came closer, her breath ragged, her face twisted in anger and disbelief. "Stop lying to me," she screamed, her words sharp like glass. She was trembling now, but not from fear, no, this was something else. It was rage, raw and untamed. "I saw the way you looked at her." Jayvonte tried to shake his head, but Kashira was already pulling something from her purse. The glint of metal caught the dim streetlight, and for the briefest moment, Jayvonte froze. A switchblade, small but deadly, gleamed in her hand. His eyes widened in shock, and his instincts screamed at him to move, to escape, to get away from her before it was too late. But it was already too late. Without warning, Kashira lunged forward. The blade sank deep into his chest, the shock of the initial blow stealing the breath from his lungs. He gasped, a strangled noise escaping his mouth as he staggered back. Blood surged from the wound, warm and wet, pouring down his shirt. She didn't stop there. She pressed the knife deeper, and another blow struck his stomach, the cold metal slicing through skin and muscle. Jayvonte's vision blurred as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. His body lurched, his legs giving out as the pain seared through him, each stab more intense than the last. Kashira's face was a mask of fury, her hands shaking but still relentless. She stabbed him again, once in his side, then his other side. Each strike felt like a new betrayal, the weight of it all crushing him. He stumbled, his blood spilling out onto the pavement, hot and thick. His breathing became ragged as the life drained out of him, the world around him turning dark. He tried to call out for help, but the words caught in his throat, drowned by the overwhelming pain. Someone yelled for an ambulance, but no one could get to him fast enough. Kashira stood over him, the blade still in her hand, her breathing erratic. She watched him collapse, his body shaking as he struggled to breathe, a trail of blood spreading across the cold concrete. For a moment, everything seemed still, except for the distant sound of sirens growing louder. Jayvonte's body was crumpled on the ground, and Kashira stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't just hurt him, she had nearly killed him. His blood was everywhere, soaking into the ground beneath them, staining the night. Jayvonte's body went limp. His chest stopped moving, his life slipping away in the place where love once burned so fiercely. The world around them seemed to move in slow motion as Kashira's grip on the knife loosened, and the reality of what she had done settled into her mind. The adrenaline faded, and with it, the sharp edge of her fury. The woman who had once been so full of fire and possessiveness was now left with nothing but the cold weight of regret. She stumbled back, her breath shaky, her mind racing to catch up with the horror she had just unleashed. The sirens grew louder, but by then, it was too late. The damage was done. Jayvonte Hill was no longer breathing, and the love story that had once been so passionate and wild had ended in a moment of unthinkable violence. As the wail of sirens grew closer, Kashira didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't even try to hide the knife in her hand. She just sat there, her body trembling, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the blood pooling around Jayvonte's lifeless body. The chaos around her blurred into background noise, the screaming witnesses, the approaching police, the honking cars, until all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. The adrenaline was still rushing through her veins, but it was starting to ebb, leaving a numbness that she couldn't shake. When the first officer arrived, his hand went to his holster, but Kashira didn't make a move. She was calm now, eerily calm, her fingers trembling only slightly as she lit a cigarette, the orange glow of the tip contrasting sharply with the darkness of the night. "Drop the weapon," the officer ordered, his voice tense but measured. Kashira didn't respond at first. She just looked up at him, her eyes vacant. Her gaze shifted back to Jayvonte's body, still lying in a pool of blood on the cold pavement, then back to the officer. Slowly, she dropped the knife, the sound of it hitting the concrete sharp in the stillness. Her fingers continued to shake, but it wasn't from fear, it was from the realization of what she had just done, though she still couldn't fully process it. The officer handcuffed her without a word. He didn't need to say anything, everything was already evident. There was no need for a chase or a struggle. Kashira didn't resist. She wasn't even looking at the officer as he read her rights. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes glazed over in a mixture of disbelief and something darker, something colder. As she was led to the squad car, Kashira's mind raced. There was no denying it. She had killed Jayvonte. No one had seen her snap, no one had seen the breakdown she had suffered that night. They only saw the aftermath, the violence, the blood, the destruction. She wanted to scream, to shout out that she didn't mean to, that it had all been a mistake, but she knew better than that. What was done couldn't be undone. At the station, Kashira was placed in an interrogation room. The officers who questioned her tried to peel back the layers of her psyche, but she remained distant, almost detached. When asked why she did it, she simply shrugged, her response a cold, "He had it coming." Her voice was flat, void of any emotion, as if she was discussing an event that had happened years ago, not just moments earlier. The investigation began almost immediately, and soon, the extent of Kashira's past came to light. Detectives sifted through her phone, uncovering text messages between her and Jayvonte that painted a portrait of a tumultuous, often toxic relationship. There were threats, arguments, and hints of possessiveness and jealousy. They found videos of public altercations, her yelling at other women, confronting Jayvonte in clubs, throwing fits when he wasn't paying her enough attention. Her friends spoke to the police, recounting stories of her violent outbursts, of how she'd pushed Jayvonte to the brink and how he had tried, time and time again, to placate her. It didn't take long for the prosecutors to build their case. They called upon friends, family, and witnesses who had seen the tension between the couple in public. They presented evidence of her violent history, an escalating pattern of jealousy and anger that had been simmering beneath the surface of their relationship. Her actions that night were not impulsive or spontaneous. They weren't a crime of passion in the traditional sense. No, this was a woman who had been carefully monitoring, obsessing over, and controlling the person she claimed to love for far too long. The stabbing, the murder, was the culmination of years of unchecked rage and possessiveness. Text messages between Kashira and her friends were revealed, filled with threatening language, jealousy-fueled rants, and vivid fantasies about punishing Jayvonte for stepping out of line. The prosecutors argued that Kashira had gone to the club that night with one goal in mind: to confront Jayvonte, to catch him, and to punish him. The moment she saw a woman near his DJ booth, something inside her snapped. She hadn't gone to that club expecting a night of fun or celebration. She had gone with a premeditated fury that only a woman driven by jealousy could harbor. They showed the jury text conversations from earlier that day, when Kashira had mentioned to a friend how she had a bad feeling about the night. The prosecution argued that it wasn't just a bad feeling, it was a premonition. Kashira had already made up her mind about what she would do. The confrontation in the club was just the final spark. As the case continued to unfold, it became clear that Kashira's volatile nature was not a one-time lapse of judgment. It was a deeply rooted issue, an uncontrollable spiral into jealousy and obsession that had consumed her. It wasn't just an argument. It wasn't just a fight. It was a crime of passion, yes, but more than that, it was a crime of obsession. The night she murdered Jayvonte wasn't an isolated incident, it was the inevitable result of years of toxic behavior that had gone unchecked, amplified by alcohol and fueled by a mind twisted by jealousy and rage. The courtroom was tense as the prosecution laid out a chilling portrait of Kashira's obsession. They presented messages, witness testimonies, and evidence that painted her as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. Her defense, however, tried to argue that she acted out of passion, insisting that her actions were the result of an uncontrollable emotional breakdown. They called for leniency, hoping to spare her from the harshest punishment. The jury deliberated for 4 long hours before returning with a verdict. Kashira was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 35 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 28 years. The gavel came down with finality, marking the end of a tumultuous chapter in both Kashira's life and Jayvonte's family's painful journey for justice. Kashira's reaction was swift and violent. She screamed in the courtroom, her voice echoing off the walls as she pointed fingers at everyone but herself. She blamed Jayvonte, his family, the justice system, even the people in the gallery, anyone but the woman who had taken a life. Meanwhile, Jayvonte's family sat quietly, their faces unreadable. There were no tears, no celebrations, only a sense of quiet satisfaction that the man they had loved and lost had finally received justice, even if it came too late. Life in prison was a harsh awakening for Kashira. Her tough, controlling persona, once enough to manipulate Jayvonte and those around her, had no power behind bars. Inmates didn't fear her, they quickly put her in her place. She realized too late that her toxic, possessive nature had stripped her of everything, her freedom, her influence, and the one person she thought she couldn't lose. Jayvonte's death left a permanent mark on his loved ones. Friends and family mourned the loss of a man whose potential had been cut short. His tragic end became a cautionary tale of the dangers of toxic love, obsession, and ignoring the signs of an unhealthy relationship. The love that had once seemed passionate and intense ultimately turned deadly, leaving nothing but sorrow in its wake. This case serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers that lie in unchecked jealousy and the fine line between passion and destruction. Jayvonte's story is a painful example of how love, when twisted by obsession and possessiveness, can lead to devastating consequences. His life was taken in a moment of fury, and his death leaves behind a trail of questions that may never be answered. It's a cautionary tale about recognizing the warning signs of toxic relationships before they spiral out of control. Could this tragedy have been prevented? The answer isn't simple. It's about being able to spot the early signs of unhealthy dynamics, knowing when to walk away, and understanding that love should never feel like a battleground. How can we recognize toxic relationships before they escalate? By paying attention to patterns, control, isolation, jealousy, and emotional manipulation. These signs should never be ignored. If this story shook you, like and subscribe for more deep dives into love, lies, and betrayal.